and today I want to tell you about light painting. And I think to truly understand light painting, we have to begin with photographing at night, right? Because light painting is very much about painting in the dark. So we have to understand some concepts and some ideas about night photography and why we would want to photograph at night. These two tied together very, very closely. So, you know, photographing at night and using man-made illumination, whether it's studio strobes or whether it's a flashlight, and like in light painting, can create a very, very dramatic difference in what we perceive, right? So this is downtown Denver in the middle of the day, very unexciting, and then the same thing at night. It starts to change and morph. It's the colors themselves that we're being attracted to, right? Las Vegas, city of lights, so beautiful, right? In the middle of the day, it's just a real snore, okay? But at night, obviously the strip transforms into something very much different. It's the color, it's the contrast that changes and makes our night photography or our light painting photography more interesting. So Golden Gate in the middle of the day and then Golden Gate at night, all right? Same subject matter. It's the bridge, but it's the color and the contrast that make it more interesting. And that's really ultimately what light painting is all about, all right? So what are the rules for photographing in low light or night photography? Well, one of them is use low ISOs, and you guys know why, right? Because we suffer all of that noise when we're shooting at high ISOs, right? And you know, the interesting thing is these days, so much of our photographs are just viewed on the web, right? Where our photographs are really, really tiny, maybe 1,000 pixels wide. That's nothing. And a lot of times we can't even judge the real quality of the image at this size. But when we blow them up or we make a print, then very readily we can see how all of this grain, and even in here, look at how this is just ill-formed compared to this. There is no comparison of the higher ISOs at the lower ISOs. So we want to use low ISOs, even though that may require 2, 3, 4 minute exposures. That's okay. That's what we want, all right? So the other thing about night photography, and I'm sure you guys are already aware of this, but it's dark out there at that time of day. And your camera is going to have a hard time focusing, right? So the cameras, or I'm sorry, the lenses that have the wider apertures, like say you have an f2.8 lens rather than a 5.6 lens, that 2.8 lens is going to have an easier time focusing in the dark because it can gather more light. All right. So one of the tricks to night photography and light painting is using fixed lenses that are very, very fast, or expensive zoom lenses that have like f2, f2.8 lenses are going to gather more light. So a lot of time what we're depending on is manual focus. And the best trick is because we're going to be light painting, we've got our flashlights handy. And what we need to do is actually shine our light on our subject and then focus. And a lot of times you can actually use autofocus at that point, but if not, you can turn on your live view on the back and expand your live view, zoom it in, and then as you're holding your flashlight on the scene, literally just dial in your focus on the point that you need. Okay, so this is a little trick. Now, the thing is once that's done, you want to ensure that you change your focus back to manual, right? Because if you don't, flashlight goes away, next time you press the button, it's searching for this subject that it cannot find. So once you get your subject sharp, you want to be sure that you're actually putting it into manual focus, therefore no longer refocusing your scene. All right, well, how about exposure? You know, I'm a big fan of spot metering. I do all of my work in spot metering. I find it the most efficient way to meter, and that's what I do, except when I'm dealing with night photography or when I'm dealing with light painting. For that, you guys, I just use matrix. I really do. And matrix is this symbol on a Canon or this on the Nikon. It's basically the honeycomb pattern that is dividing up your frame and allowing the camera to take multiple readings and sort of average them together to give you a good exposure. And the reason that this works is because there's such high contrast here at this time of day between the really deep darks and the super bright whites. The camera does a good job of averaging them together for our uses, but it doesn't always do that. But if we were to use spot meter, wherever your spot meter is, it's going to take that meter reading, and it would make this white, these white fountains of water just middle gray, and that's no good. So I actually use matrix more often at night than I do any other time during the day. All right. So the other thing about the exposure is that our histograms are going to be so important for nighttime photography, right? I mean, they're important for every type of photography, but they're going to be really important at nighttime because we need to ensure that we get a good exposure because it's so dark that it's really easy to underexpose our shots, right? Now, when it comes to histograms, you guys, there's all kinds of different shapes of histograms, and there's not one shape of a histogram that is correct. All right, all of these are correct and all of these are fine. This is just signifying to us where the information is. So in a histogram like this, most of the scene is bright, like a light gray or a white. Here, more of the scene is in the dark values because the big spike is down here. Here we have a mix of a little bit of light and dark, and then here the image again is kind of weighted to the left. This is more what you would see with a nighttime histogram. But also, we know that when you clip a histogram on the right-hand side, you're losing what? Does anybody know? You're losing highlights, exactly correct. And for our normal photography, this is generally unacceptable, right? All of this is blown out, and that's no good. We've got a white sky that's blown out, that's no good. But the thing about it is, you guys, if you're working at night, a lot of times, what you're going to get, instead of having these blinkies work on very important areas, you may find that what's actually blinking is the lights themselves. Especially if you're mixing in light painting with city lights or even street lights or perhaps car lights, car trails, whatever, you're going to get that blinking. But the problem is that it's blinking in the areas that really don't need any detail, right? It's not important for us to have small little highlights like that filled with detail. So this is actually a pretty good histogram. We're getting plenty of shadow detail, and only the unimportant highlights are blown out, and that's okay. That's all right. Normally we wouldn't want that, but at night it's okay, because if we brought our exposure down dark enough so that these little lights were not blinking any longer, we would have something that looked more along the lines of this. That's what the exposure it would take to keep those from blinking. And clearly this is just not going to work for us as far as a photograph works. Make sense, folks? Yep. All right. Does anybody have any questions yet on histograms? How many people use their histograms? Oh, good, excellent. I'm seeing a lot of that. Okay, very good. That's good. Now, as I said, the reason it's important is because we've got so much contrast in our scene, right? And so when we're dealing with light painting and night photography, we really need to concentrate on the brightest areas. And what I mean by that is when we're going around doing our normal photography, what we're really focused on is the general subject. It's like, I photograph dogs, I photograph mountains, I photograph people, I photograph snakes, whatever it is you do. And it's like, that's what you're focused on. You know, so your f-stop and your shutter speed are all geared to capturing that subject. Well, when we're dealing with light painting, we're dealing with night photography, our subject is actually light. Yeah, light is falling on subjects, and we'll choose our subjects to photograph, that's true. But we're actually photographing the light itself. So what we want to do is we want to begin by picking subjects with a lot of color. Or when we pick subjects to paint with light, we want to paint subjects that are going to respond well to the light and that are going to be prominent in our frame. So we're really kind of crafting our light. So for example, here I was in Australia, and this was a shot I took of the bridge down there. And it's okay, but notice how much black we have in the sky. That's kind of boring. But by filling the frame with just a little bit more color, see all this darkness down here? Basically just zooming in a little bit, changing my location. Now this is all filled with color, and the sky is less. It becomes a more powerful image when there's more color within the scene, more light within the scene. All right? So when it comes to choosing times for obviously shooting at night or for our light painting, we have to really understand the rhythm of the sun and the rhythm of the moon. And what I mean by that is there's a difference between twilight and nighttime photography, or twilight and night. What you can do is there's dozens of different applications you can get for your smartphone that will tell you different twilight times. Here you can see a chart that's pulled up for my hometown of Missoula in Montana, and you can see the sunrise begins at 8:20 in the morning and the sun sets at 10:05. These other twilights are civil twilight, nautical twilight, and astronomical twilight. And believe it or not, you guys you already know what these are just innately by being humans and witnessing, the rhythm of the day. The light slowly gets darker and darker and darker and darker until it becomes pure black at the end of the day. But we can use these twilights to help us plan our shots. All right. So these are the ones we're going to look at: civil, nautical, and astronomical. Now, sunset itself is really kind of peculiar because a lot of people will go out and they'll catch these, these great clouds, whether over New Jersey or, in the morning out over the water. But that's actually not a sunset, you guys. What you're actually photographing is civil twilight. Sunset is the time exactly when the sun is touching the horizon, right? So this is sunset exactly when the sun is right on the horizon. Okay, well, that is not all of the sun in the clouds, 20 minutes after the sun goes down. So we have to remember sunset itself is on the horizon. And at this time, it's really too bright to paint with light and the out of doors. All right. Now, civil twilight is about 25 to 40 minutes after the sun has set. Okay, now this is what you guys think of, not just you, but what we think of as photographers as sunset. Oh, I went out and I shot a nice colorful sunset. Well, this is actually civil twilight. Again, civil twilight. But the beautiful thing about civil twilight, you guys, is that this is when the sky matches the illumination of cities, man-made objects. Right? So this is about 25 minutes after the sun has gone down. 25 to 40 minutes, depending on where you are in the world, right? If you're closer to the equator, their civil twilights are very, very short. The sun goes down, it touches the horizon, and you're like, okay, it's going to be in the clouds, and boom, it's completely pitch black, and you're like, what the heck just happened? You go up to Alaska, and you're sitting there through the dusk for hours, and you're like, really, isn't it dark yet? Where the heck are the stars? The sun set an hour and a half ago. So the twilights really depend on where you are. The further north, the longer they are. But this is a miraculous time of day to shoot, you guys, especially when you're mixing your light, okay? So we have to think about this as a mix between the ambient light of the sunset and the man-made light, obviously, of the streets, all right, or of the cars. So this is going to be the very same thing we're doing when we're light painting as well. We're mixing in that man-made light with whatever ambient light may be around. All right, now nautical twilight, you guys, is about an hour after the sun goes down. And for that, the sky is going to be a little bit darker. So let's say sunset 6:30. We could say, you know what, at 7:30, if I want to do some light painting, I'm going to be able to get a nice dark sky, but still have it not be pitch black. And I'm going to have enough time to wave my flashlight around to illuminate my subjects. All right, but you can see the difference in the sky at nautical twilight. It's just a bit deep darker, right? Or here, the same thing, nautical twilight rather than the civil twilight. Now, astronomical twilight, folks, that is the time when it really starts to get totally dark, okay? Now, in a place like New York City, of course, it never gets totally dark. But if you were out away from all the light pollution, then you would see it would be completely black, right? Okay, so this is about an hour and a half after the sunset, or an hour and a half before the sunrise, as you can see here. You guys, this is the time when the sky is completely black. And if you're shooting cityscapes, or if you're shooting even out in the country and you're light painting and stuff, having a really dark black sky is not the most effective. It's not the most effective way to photograph because it becomes a hole that we fall into. Look at the difference here between this bridge and that bridge. They're both shot at night. This is civil twilight. That's astronomical twilight. Right? This just has more atmosphere to it. Okay? So what I try to do is if I'm shooting during astronomical twilight, I am not likely to include sky. Right? So this is astronomical twilight and the sky is just pitch black. That is just not exciting. So rather what I would do is in this case, use the city light or whatever, and just exclude the sky and fill the frame with color. Whether you're painting it in or whether you're using the available light, filling the frame with color. Again, no sky to be seen here. Oh, well, there's like a little smidgen of sky there. Or same thing here. I'm just using all of the street lights. I'm using the car lights. Right? Fill your frame with that color to make it exciting. Right? And astronomical twilight, you guys, is also the same time for you to do star trail photography. Okay, this all combines together. So star trail photography is really exciting. Again, when you can get away a little bit from the light pollution, but it's really pretty dark out. So your exposures become quite a bit longer. So this is 15-minute exposure, 15 minutes at f4. And as we had said earlier when we first started, our ISOs are low, 100 and 200. So most of these images you're going to see are 100 or 200 ISO. So this is a 15-minute exposure, right? That's because it's really dark. And after 15 minutes, you actually do get some light in the sky. Pretty cool, right? Same thing here, 15 minutes. This one's at f 3.5. So again, very wide open. Now, if you want to do star points, then what we're looking at is a much higher ISO. The only way we can capture something without it streaking across the sky is to kind of shoot it dead in its tracks. And for this, you need to shoot it about 20 or 30 seconds, wide open. This is, again, f4. But in order to do that, you need a high ISO. That's ISO 3200. All right? So star points can be a lot of fun, absolutely. And what's even better is when you mix all of the things we just talked about in night photography with actual painting with light. Because then you can take those star points or clouds or whatever you're working on and transform it into a wholly different type of photograph. Right? So now this is completely illuminated with a flashlight against the star trails in the back, or the star points in the back. All right. So, what is painting with light, you guys? Well, I mean, basically by definition, it's us adding an artificial light into the scene. That could be flash. That could be a flashlight. I've seen all kinds of neat devices that people are bringing to my workshops to paint with light. You know, these light wands and all kinds of different stuff. Anything that's artificial, what that is painting with light. All right. So we're adding light to a dark subject. Now, the difference, I got to tell you guys, it can be dramatic. Because you become truly the artist, right? Now, I've been doing photography for well over 20 years, and I've always captured what was there, right? With the exception of when I worked in my commercial studio, and I would actually have to create from scratch. You know, you get a project and they say, okay, you know, build this, and so you're taking this and bringing it in, taking this and building it in. You're actually creating the photograph that you are going to take. Most of us, most of the time, go out and we're like, ooh, that's neat, click, let me take a picture of that. We're photographing found objects. But when you're painting with light, you actually become the artist that is crafting the light in the scene. It's really, really different than just simply snapping what is there. And it's really empowering, right? So you're taking something that's completely dark, and again, I'll show you guys how to get this ambient exposure and such. This is like a half moon or a full moon night. And every bit of light that was added in here was done with my flashlight. Right? So I've painted the bell from one side, and then I painted the bell from the other side, and then I laid on my back behind this wall, and I painted up in here, and then I went on the other side and laid on my back and painted the flashlight straight up. You know, then I walked around over here and painted the sides of the little entryways in here. And then, of course, stood inside and painted the inside of that. So a lot going on. This isn't just standing at the camera and illuminating the subject, but it's actually thinking, how is the subject shaped? Where can I put in light? Where do I want the light to be brighter? Where do I want it to be darker? And you're just delving into this whole painting process, except our canvas is the outside world, or even the inside world, all right? So how do we begin with this, you guys? Well, we'll begin with our ambient light, and I'm going to get more into this later, and I'm actually going to use this example. But you can see here that this is the last bit of sunlight from the day. It's actually moonlight, rather. But you know, this is like a 2-minute exposure, and then completely illuminated with a flashlight. All right. Or light painting can be flash itself. This actual exposure is 1/125th of a second. And it's in the daytime. Now, granted, it's just about, oh, maybe the sun is just set, but it's an overcast day, so it's pretty dark, right? But here, I didn't have time to actually, you know, have a minute or 2 minutes to walk around and paint this car. So what I did was I took several different exposures with my flash. So very literally, I had my camera facing the truck, and I would go to the side of the truck over here and pop in some flash. And then I would walk to the other side of the truck, take another photograph, pop in some flash. Then I walked behind the truck, stood in the bed and put the flash through the window, took another picture and popped it. So now I've got a half a dozen pictures, all separate illuminations, that were shot at 1/125th of a second. And then I blended them together in Photoshop to make it look like they were, like I had 7 different flashes on the scene, you know, which I did not. So again, though, this is just illuminating a subject with extra material, flash, flashlight, right? Here I'm using the full moon light and the flashlight combined together to create this scene. So here what we have is the full moon light is illuminating all of these rocks. So you guys, this is about a 3-minute exposure, probably about f8. I don't have the note here for what this is, but I almost always shoot right in the area of f8. So 3 minutes at f8 produces this amount of light, right? And same thing up here. Clearly I didn't paint the mountain, so any of that light is coming from the moon. That's my ambient exposure. Well then, I waltz in, and I stood in this doorway, and literally, as I was standing in the doorway, I stood very still and just painted the whole inside of that building. And of course, it was like white concrete, so it just it got very, very bright because I stood there during almost the whole exposure. Then what I did was went along and painted the inside of here, went around the outside, and then shined my flashlight back in here to create that highlight in the window. Can you all see that? Little touches like that are important, or else it just becomes flat. And we're trying to create this 2-dimensional subject, but make it look 3-dimensional and have depth to it. So we want those little flourishes, those little extras. And then of course painted down here and then down here as well off in the distance. So during that 3-minute exposure, of course, the clouds are moving, you know, very slowly across the sky. We're even getting some star trails in here as well. But shots like this are all done in absolutely one shot. This is one frame. So this is a 15-minute exposure. And this is at f2.8 to get the star trails. So remember, we were talking about our star trails before, and I said we're using low ISOs, very long amounts of time, 15 minutes, f2.8, wide open. But during that whole of the 15 minutes, I am actually painting the inside of this arch. and painting across here. Now there was no moon on this night, so it was very dark. So I was literally, and I promise you this, not to give you this horrible visual, but crawling around on these rocks because I couldn't see anything until I began to paint, and then I could kind of see, but I couldn't see anything. And then what I did was I went to the other side of the arch and painted straight up on the inside of the arch. And I tell you that because, do you notice how this is lighter here? And it's a little bit darker back here? That's very intentional, you guys. That's creating depth, much like you would in a studio as you're sculpting somebody's face with several different light sources. Okay, so this is not just painting in one direction, but painting from lots of different directions. And then to finish this one off, I went and I put my flashlight in a little notch of the rock, and then just went bloop and gave one, pierce of light back towards the camera to create this little star, for lack of a better word. All right, so you guys, the real beauty of light painting, I think, is that it gives you the ability, as I said, to craft the light. You become the artist. Folks, this is a completely dark scene. Every bit of light that you see here has been added in with my flashlight. So notice that there's differences in brightness, there's differences in intensity, there's differences in color, and there's differences in angle. So Gabriel I'm sure many of you have seen Gabriel speak here. Gabriel and I were out on this workshop teaching, and we got to the place earlier, because we wanted to scout out to see how we were going to photograph, where we were going to photograph, what we wanted our subjects to be. So we found this, and this was our demo example for the night for our group. So in here, and forgive the lack of technical details, I understand you want to know how long I painted and what flashlights and so on. I'm going to get to all that. We're just in the intro here. So for this, what I did was my main light really was standing over here, painting back against the front of this and that. Whoops, sorry about that. So that is our primary light source. In a studio, we would call that our main light. That's our main light. That's doing the most illuminating. Okay, well then you can see that this side of the truck is also illuminated, but the light is blue. Can you all see that difference in color? Well, that's because I put a blue gel on when I painted this side, and I painted it for a fraction of the time. Let's say I stood here painting that for 10 seconds. Then this was like maybe 2 seconds paint job, really super fast. Then I got quite low to the ground and literally probably about 2 inches off the ground with my flashlight. So, quite low. And then just kind of sprayed the whole ground to give it that texture. Okay, then I painted a highlight here to make it look like it was from this light source. And then again, a very slight amount of fill in the front. Are you guys seeing that? How that kind of, the light on here sort of matches the light on here? Okay, then a little bit of light up there, and then a little bit of light back here. And then this is the actual darkness in the scene back there, so that's the regular amount of moonlight. So the whole entire thing was captured. So the beauty of light painting is that you are the artist, you are the one that's really making your photograph rather than taking your photograph. All right. So you guys, one of the main reasons we want to paint with light, of course, is for the look of the light. Light painting is like nothing else. There used to be something called a hose master back in the 80s, and you guys may remember that. It was a studio tool that kind of had this sort of look. But for the most part, we don't see this kind of look. So the reason is because when you're using a small light source, you can take that light source and you can make it be a very, very large light source, or you can make it be a small light source, and you can make it come from a dozen different directions, as if you were setting up a dozen different lights. All right, so this is really quite a fascinating thing. So for example, here you guys is me standing right behind my camera. So as I'm looking at this abandoned building, I am standing right behind my camera, and I've taken my flashlight and I've just painted like this. This is what you never want to do, ever, 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 ever. So it gives you a very flat look. This would be as if I just simply put a flash on my camera and popped it during the exposure. It's very, very unappealing. All right, now just compare that visually to something that looks like this. Now that, of course, is done with a flashlight. So what we have here is the ability to create depth and texture just by using one small light from lots of different angles. All right, so if you break this up, if you look at the shadows where you're seeing them, you can't see any shadows here because they're all falling directly behind. There is no shadows here. There is no shadows to any of this texture here. That's because the light source is right on camera. Okay, so then we go here and we're like, okay, whoa, there's a lot of dark and light. And that texture comes from a different angle of the paintbrush, which is our flashlight. So, for example, I walked along, I began by painting the ground. And once again, I lowered my flashlight and I knelt down until my flashlight was about 2 or 3 inches off the ground, so very low. And then just sort of sprayed the whole of the concrete back and forth. Okay? And that very low angle gives you all of this really cool texture compared to that. Right? Quite exciting. All right, then next I painted the side of the building and this side of the building. This side I painted from here, and when I say, you guys, that I painted the side of the building, let's say that this screen is actually the wall. I don't mean my flashlight was out here. I mean it's like almost directly at the side. That's what gives all that texture. And then I walked around to the other side and painted back in the same direction. Okay? Then what I did was I walked up very close and painted this and the bottom here, you know, the seat of the chair, so that they tend to glow even more than the legs themselves. Right? So that is very much crafted and thought about. Same thing here. This is the inside of a little boxcar. And this is kind of, I tried to paint some light in from the outside, but this is generally kind of a flat illumination with my flashlight just on the inside. Compare that to using different colors and different angles in this photograph. Right? So here, what I did was I had a little bit of a blue gel on and painted, as I'm looking straight down here, I painted just for a couple of seconds to give this some general illumination in here. Very, very short, very short. Okay, then what I did was I walked outside the boxcar and pointed my flashlight once again at the rim of the window here. So you can see that's kind of highlighted, right, you guys? Then I walked around the other side and I did the same thing. So now we have these highlights on the window, which is suggesting light coming in from the outside. Then I walked around to the rear of the car and pointed my flashlight in, and you can see it's creating this shadow, where here we're really not getting much of that, but here we're getting a lot of this really cool shadow coming in. And when I'm outside, I'm using a yellow gel. So you go from flat to more exciting because of many different angles that we're using. Or you can compare it with, let's say, a flash, an on-camera flash, a speed light, versus painting with light. So this is a flash, and then this is painted with a flashlight. So it's a very different kind of a look that you get. But I think the most important thing is that you are creating the light. You're thinking about your subject, you're thinking about what you want to include, and you're thinking about how you want to illuminate it. So when I saw this, I just love this, this old gas pump here. I thought, okay, well, that's gonna be my main subject. So of course I put it kind of like on the rule of thirds there. And then I thought, okay, where am I gonna paint? What do I want to highlight? What do I want to illuminate? Well, I began with my ambient exposure. And the ambient exposure in this case is just whatever moonlight there might be in the scene. And that ended up being a 4-minute exposure at f11. Okay, pretty common for me, 3 or 4 minutes, f8, f11. Okay, well, this exposure right in here is actually the ambient light. So there's no light painting going on there. There's no light painting going on the back of this building or on this tree or on this mountain in the back. Okay, so you can see that there is enough light to make it look like dark daylight, right? Then I come in with the flashlight. So I stood up on these stairs and painted downward and illuminated the handrails here, and then painted the steps as well, and then painted this area to make it as if a light was coming down from the top of the stairs, right? Then I walked over and very quickly just painted this. Now remember, metal is going to reflect a lot more light. So you paint for a shorter amount of time on metal than you would on, say, wood. Than you would on wood, right? So this I painted for a little bit less time because it's somewhat reflective. All right, then I painted the top of this by standing back and holding my camera very high, again at a pretty straight or a pretty narrow angle. So I am way, probably about 10 feet to the right of this building, 10 feet this way, and my camera or my flashlight is held high, and I'm wanting to get that detail coming across. Then I painted this, then I painted the side, and then I painted the other side. So I went from one side and then I painted the other side of the gas can. So again, how many different angles is that? But what you end up with is a look that you could never get with just using natural daylight. All right. Last example here, this is one that 3 of us did together. And by the way, you guys, this is just one single shot too. This is not a composite. This is one single shot. It is not a composite. So this is this crazy truck some guy built in the desert, and the 3 of us had to work on this to get this because we were shooting for 3 minutes at f8, and that would give us the natural moonlight. Here you can see 3 minutes worth of star trails in the sky. This is the natural illumination. This is the natural illumination, and the shadow is a natural illumination from the moon. Okay, but then we come in with our lights. Gabe was on inside duty, so Gabriel went inside with a flashlight. I can't remember whether he gelled it blue or whether it was blue on the inside. And he popped it 3 times. Popped it once here, and then once coming out the door. And that gives it the illumination on the inside. Then one of our students was painting this tire and this tire just to give it a little bit of brightness. You can imagine this would be pitch black, if this hasn't been painted. And then he also painted the back of the truck. Me, I was on headlight detail. So I crouched behind the other side here and just put my flashlight out like this. And the first time I tried it, I was like, oh, I can't see any flashlight at all. It's because you need some particles or something. So I got the brilliant idea of, and I mean that not in a good way, but of taking handfuls of dust, throwing it up in the air, and then putting my flashlight out. I'm like, ooh, that will illuminate it, right? And well, it did, except for the wind was coming right back in my face the whole time. And we had to do this in like 4 or 5 takes, so I was completely filled with dust. But this is dust that I threw up in the air, and my flashlight just pointing out in that direction for basically the bulk of the exposure. Okay, so a lot of different ideas going on here. So when can you paint with light, you guys? Well, you can certainly do it in complete darkness. You've seen several examples of moonlit nights. And you can mix light painting with street illumination or, man-made illumination. So here I was in a prison just as a visitor for, actually, did you all see the Shawshank Redemption? That movie Shawshank? Yeah, great movie, right? This is the prison that it was filmed in. It's amazing. It's in Ohio. If y'all ever get a chance to see it, it's the Mansfield Reformatory. It's incredible looking inside. But at any rate, I went down into solitary confinement. I was trying to find the darkest place that I could because I wanted to paint with light, right? I wanted to use my flashlight. So this was the darkest place I could find. And I started by getting my ambient exposure here. This looked the way it did at 1 minute at f8. Okay, again, ISO 100. So this is 1 minute at f8, gave me this exposure. So you can imagine it must be pretty darn dark down there. All right, so 1 minute at f8 gives me this. Then it's time for me to start adding my light in. So I now have 1 minute with which to work. to work my flashlight. So the resulting image, and again, this isn't a composite, it's just one photograph, is me standing inside the solitary confinement cell and first painting this wall and the floor, and then putting my flashlight through to cast this shadow on the floor. All right, so you guys, that was complete darkness. Again, here's a moonlit night. So here I'm in Zion National Park, and this is, again, 3 minutes at f8. Are you guys starting to see a, right? 3 minutes at f8. This is full moon night. So that's how long it takes full moon to almost look like daylight. 3 minutes at f8, ISO, in this case 200. Okay, but then what I did was I went up and then I painted the building. All right, so that is obviously an abandoned building, but now it looks like it's being occupied. So moonlit nights, another moonlit night. This is, I just love the shot. I actually had the pleasure of being out one night teaching a workshop outside of Washington, D.C., and fog rolled in under moonlight. I mean, you know, fog is in the morning. You just don't get that at night. You know, it was beautiful. So I wandered around these moist, damp meadows for a couple of hours playing, and I found this shot. And this is ambient moonlight, you guys. This is 1.5 minutes at f8. So it was very, very bright full moon. And then what I did was I just added in some light to the back of the chair. So literally, I hid behind this tree, and I looked up at these branches here and took my flashlight and just painted straight up to illuminate the branches underneath me. And then what I did was I painted the side of this right here from behind the tree, and then walked around in the meadow over here and just ever so slightly added in a little bit of fill there. So if I spent, you know, 8-10 seconds painting, you know, the side of this, then this fill light was maybe like 2 seconds, and then done. To give it that depth, right? To give it that one side brighter than the other side. All right? And then, of course, you can light paint and mix it in even with street illumination. So this is a 4-second exposure at f5. And then that. All right? That's the ambient light from the distant street lights, and then me with my flashlight during a 4-minute exposure. All right? So lots of times, there's lots of ways that we can paint with light. Now we know the reasons, now we know the situations we can use, so now let's talk about how are we going to do this thing, right? Well, not a whole lot of hard and fast rules apply to light painting. The reason is that it's very difficult and nearly impossible to gauge the exposure. So I can't say, if you set your camera to ISO 100 and put it at f8, you will need to stand at a certain location and paint for 5 seconds. I can't do it. Because if you did this for 5 seconds, that would be vastly different than doing this for 5 seconds. Right? Imagine I'm painting this gentleman in the front row. Sorry, man. Sorry to call you out like that. But if I'm doing this, the light source is going over him and going away from him, and then over him and away from him. Understood? You see what I'm saying, you guys? But if my light source is just like this, it's staying on him the whole time. So somebody says, oh, I painted for 5 seconds like this, and then somebody else says, oh, I painted for 5 seconds, and they're doing this, completely different exposures. Then you have the power of the flashlight. So there's 65 lumen flashlights, there's 100 lumen flashlights, there's 200 lumen flashlights, 500 lumen flashlights. How bright is the light you're using? Then you have reflectivity. Are you doing wood? Are you doing ceramic? Are you doing metal? Are you doing glass? They all reflect different amounts of light. So you guys, the only way you can really do this is experiment. So if you could do something like turn off all the lights in your house and, you know, put a bike up in your living room or something, just allow it to be completely dark and paint the light or paint the bike. Try it for 10 seconds and then open your, look at the back of your camera. Way too much, way too little. It's the only way you're gonna know. It's the only way you're gonna know. You've got to experiment. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to try lots of different things. And the first thing to think about is have no fear. All right? You're going to open that shutter, you're going to walk into that scene, and you're going to start illuminating your subject. And when you think it's good, you're going to stop. And then you're going to go back and see what you've done. And then you'll know you painted way too much or way too little, right? So you're going to start with your focus, you guys. So as we mentioned before, you want to use your flashlight to focus on your subject, especially if you're coming on something in the complete dark. So once again, you can use your autofocus if your flashlight, if your subject is close enough, you know, within 10 or 15 feet, your flashlight is going to be bright enough that you can actually focus right on there. If it's a lot further away than that, you may have some difficulty, and you guys may have to actually use the meter scale or the foot scale on the front of your lens. All right. Now, once we get our camera in focus, let's say we're just in complete darkness, you guys. You know, there's, you know, a sliver of a moon out, it's really super dark, you know, maybe you're in an alley and there's no street light, whatever. Just to start with something, start at 200. Start at ISO 200 and put it at f8. It's a good enough starting spot. It'll work out for you. All right, next, begin by adding light with your flashlight, you guys. Just go paint your subject. Don't be afraid, just go do it, all right? Then what you'll do is you check your histogram, check the back of your, the back of your LCD, see how you've done, and then go back in and add less or more light. And that's it. If it is completely dark, your exposure is going to be 100% dependent upon how long you paint your subject and how close you are to your subject. So if obviously, the closer you get to your subject with your flashlight, the brighter your subject will be. Make sense, you guys? All right. Now, here's roughly how this worked for me. Just so you guys realize that, yeah, I mean, I'm up here trying to show you the best things I've ever done, right? And so, thank you. But just realize, I don't just get up to a scene and go, okay, let's see, ISO 100, 4 minutes, go in, paint, come back, go, awesome, I'm so damn good, and then move on. It doesn't happen, It just doesn't happen. That's not the way it works. So here is my first shot. This is the ambient light shot, and I didn't do any light painting here. So then I started and I tried to add in some light to what I thought. I painted some on the side here, some on the side here, then I painted this, and then I painted that, and I got back and I'm like, well, not nearly enough light. I need to, need to paint more. So I tried painting more, and I painted more on the doors and less on the truck. That didn't work. Then I tried it again, even more exposure. All right. Then I tried it again, even more exposure. And then the last one. Do you see how long that took me to get it right? That's pretty common, you guys. You just got to get out there and experiment. Even if your first one looks like that or that, it's okay. At least you'll know. And you're going to do things like count to yourself, 1001, 1002, 1003, and sort of get into a rhythm, and that's going to help you come up with your final result so it can be repeated. Now, when you're in mixed ambient light, that's when you have to find your ambient exposure first. So what you're going to do is find your base exposure with a high ISO. Right? So I might actually set my ISO to 6400 and try to get my base exposure. When I say my base exposure, I mean my ambient exposure. All right? Then what I'm going to do is extrapolate back to a low ISO to do my painting. So let's say I come up with a 2-second exposure at 6400, and my ambient light looks good. That means I'm going to go 2 minutes at ISO 100. All right, and I'll explain that again in just 1 second, but that's the extrapolating back. Then, once I found that, I've got my ambient light for ISO 100 at 2 minutes. Then I'm going to add my light in with my flashlight. Then I'm going to check my exposure and go back and continue working with my flashlight. All right, so here is a 3.5 minute shot at f8. This is the natural moonlight, you guys. You can see kind of how much fun it is actually shooting under half moons and full moons and stuff, just to get the natural light of the scene. And that's why I say night photography is so intertwined with light painting. This is 3.5 minutes at f8. And then, again, 3.5 minutes at f8, but this time I'm painting the scene with light. All right. So the way that we're going to check and get our ambient exposure at a high ISO is looking at it in this way, right? If you set your ISO to 6400 and take some test shots, if it ends up being 1 second, it extrapolates very nicely back to 1 minute at ISO 100. Okay, so that's the simple rule. Whatever it is at 6400 in seconds, it equals at 100 in minutes. And that's very handy. So when you're trying to, when you're trying to really fine tune your composition, you don't want to have to sit there for 3 minutes during an exposure and wait and wait and wait, and after 3 minutes realize, oh gosh, I've got to move my camera a little bit to the left. Okay, and then another 3 minutes, and that would just simply take you all night to do. So instead of shooting 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, that 3 would become 3 seconds at ISO 6400. So then it's 1001, 1002, 1003. Look at it. No, move my camera. Oh, I'm out of focus. Change your focus. Move it down. Okay, now I am ready. Now I'm ready to do it in minutes, right? So ISO 64, 1 second. ISO 100, 1 minute. Make sense, everyone? You can see why you'd want to do all of your test exposures at high ISOs, right? It's a big time-saving thing. You can fine-tune your composition, you can fine-tune your lighting, get your proper ambient exposure. Then you'll do a series of 3-minute exposures, and the first couple are going to be your attempts at light painting, which will fail, and then your 4th or 5th, which is just going to be absolutely marvelous and beautiful. All right. So, in order to spend a lot of time light painting, what you guys should really do is test your exposures. Test your long exposure noise reduction. So what happens, folks, is that over very long periods of time, like 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 8 minutes, your sensors heat up, and all that heat causes your pixels to get stuck like on one color. So what you'll have is you'll look at this photograph and you'll see all these tiny little dots, which are single pixels of red, green, and blue light everywhere dotted throughout your image. And that's called long exposure noise. And it comes from the sensor heating up over long periods of time. So how long? Really hard to say, folks, because every camera is different. So the warmer it is, the more sensor heat you're going to get. So what I thought was, if I take my camera inside my house at 70 degrees and just run a series of tests at, let's say, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 6 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, then I'm going to see where the noise starts. And I may be able to take all of my shots at 5 minutes, no problem at all, no noise. But as soon as I go to 8 minutes, I have to turn on my long exposure noise reduction. All right, does that make sense to you guys? So if you do it in like a 70-degree environment, that's going to work for just about everything. Whether you're out in the desert or whether you're, in the city. If it gets colder than that, no problem. You can even go longer and longer. But that'll at least give you the threshold. So I did, and I found my camera went to 10 minutes. It went to 10 minutes without any noise And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's fine. I'm never going to be painting much more than that. So that's where I stopped. All right. But you should do that, because if you have an older camera or a very inexpensive camera body, you may start to see long exposure noise at even a minute or 2 minutes. So you've got to check it. You really got to check it, you guys. All right. So definitely different cameras, different amounts. So do that test for long exposures. So another trick, you guys, is LCD brightness. Here's the thing, when it's dark, your pupils get really big. And our LCDs, especially in the modern cameras, are so bright that they're going to seem like our photographs are very, very bright and illuminated when they're actually not. Our eyes are oversensitive to these bright sensors. So what you want to do is you want to lower your LCD brightness. So the first thing I do as soon as it starts to get dark, I go into my cameras, again, into the menus, go to LCD brightness, and it's usually set to auto, much like your phone. And then what I'll do is I'll simply put it into manual and darken it down to the lowest setting. And then suddenly you can barely see your screen. But you know what? After walking around in the dark for 3 minutes and you come back and that illuminates, it's going to seem pretty bright. If you leave it at its normal setting, I guarantee you almost every one of your exposures is going to be underexposed, because it's going to seem so bright to you, and it's really not. Okay, so please lower your LCD brightness. And do the same thing on your phone. You may want to use your phone as a timer. Now, there's this handy photo store that can actually sell you these cool timers. I actually use the Velo Shutter Boss. And you know, I can set it for a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever I want. But if you don't have that, you can use your phone. And some people even use their phone as a flashlight. Lower the brightness so it doesn't kill your eyes. All right. And speaking of that, you guys should really have a red flashlight. You know, I have a red headband flashlight that I use for searching around in my backpack for gear, looking at the back of my camera. If this was a full-on light that I'd use for painting and I shine it on the back of my camera and my eyes are right here, it's painful. It's really super bright. All right, so get yourself a nice red flashlight to look around instead of using your phone. All right. Now, also turn on your blinkies. They can be pretty helpful in checking whether you've painted so much. I know, like, I just got done shooting a couple of graveyards, right? And so I'm painting these tombstones. Well, the tombstones are, you know, granite or limestone, and you paint them long enough and they can get really, really bright. You don't want them blown out. You want to see that texture, you know, in the thing that you're photographing. So you don't want something to be completely blown out. That's a very important texture in your frame. And that's just like regular photography. There's nothing different there, all right? So use your overexposure warning. All right, now, when it comes to painting techniques, as I said, the amount of time that you're actually going to illuminate the subject is really hard to guess, so you've just got to try it. But let's think about how we move our flashlight. So, for example, let's say you guys are sitting behind the camera and you're illuminating the front, or you know, you're taking a picture of the screen. As I said before, even if my flashlight was over here, this is not enough of an angle to reveal the texture in this screen. So I would want my flashlight here. Well, now that's good. I can do that. But you guys, painting with your flashlight like this is different than painting with your flashlight like this. All right. We have to go back to the concept of a big light source is a soft light source. A small light source is a hard light source. So if I'm painting like this, it's basically like I'm using a small little light source and I'm just angling it up and down. So I'm going to cast very, very hard shadows in one direction only. All right, now, if I go like this, it's basically making the shape of my light that tall and this thin. That's a very different kind of light source, all right? So think about how you're actually moving. This is going to be a soft, this is going to be a hard. I'll give you an example. Just 2 nights ago, I was in a cemetery shooting and there was this vault and it had tree branches in front of it, right? And so if I painted like this, I got very hard shadows on the wall. If I painted like this, the shadow would actually move up and down like that on the wall and would be almost imperceptible in the final image. Does that make sense to you guys? So, hard light, soft light. All right? So, we want to stick to the side, you guys, rather than front lit. Again, we're trying to create a three-dimensional scene out of a two-dimensional subject. And this looks really pretty flat because I stood right behind the camera, or maybe even off to the side of the camera a little bit. And it looks pretty flat. Compare that to this. Much more dimension to it. And in this one, what I did was I stood right off to the side of the statue, way over here, and just painted the light like this, you guys. Up and down. And then I even moved out a little bit and painted to add in some light to the shadows. All right. So again, here is painting straight on from the camera. Very boring. It's just terribly boring. And it's evenly illuminated. And that is not exciting either. This looks like the same brightness as that. I mean, it's a little darker as you go back, but not much, right? Very, very, very boring. This, however, is much different because my light is way to the side. Now I'm spending more time painting in here and up here, a little bit less in here, but you're getting all those folds and shadows compared to that.
So where were you standing?
Directly to the side. So literally, again, if this is my subject, if this is the front of my statue and my camera's back here, I'm not to the side here, I am to the side here. Really to the side. And that is just raking the light across those edges and the texture, and that's what gives it to you. The gentleman to my right asked earlier, what about the the shape of the light and the overlapping of the light, and what's it going to look like if I move it a lot or move it a little? And I can't remember your exact question, but this is the answer to it. Is that different distances are going to change the exposure and the shape of your light. So you can well imagine if I was painting this wall from here, then I might have like a 2-foot radius of light. But if I was painting it from back there, one beam would illuminate the whole of the wall. So now if I get close and paint this like this for a long period of time and then slowly back up, then I'm going to end up with a very hard ball of light and then a soft darkening down on the outside. Does that make sense to you guys? Whereas if I stood back there and just went, it would be perfectly evenly lit. So we have the ability to change the look of our light by how close we are. So for example, you guys, this is a fairly even light from the side. So in this case, I was just painting this star on the fence, and from where I stood, I didn't really have to use my flashlight much. It was just about 10 feet away, and I just kind of held it there for the length of the exposure, and that was it. But then what I did, and this is really important, you guys, I want you to check this out. Then what I did is I walked very close. So now I was right up close, and I had to paint for a much shorter time, of course, because I'm closer to it. But I moved in, and you can see the illumination kind of fades off here. Whoa. Fades completely into another photograph. It's a trick, these flashlights. You can see it kind of fades off, right? Fades off, versus that. That is further back, big, broad illumination. This is up closer, spending less time, but moving the flashlight more. All right? So the closer you are, the brighter it's going to be. So here's lots of different levels of illumination. And this is up in your neck of the woods. This is in the Bronx, Woodlawn Cemetery. Great place to photograph. So here, notice how the light is brighter on the door. The light is brighter right in here. The light is brighter on the ceiling and the edges of the columns compared to this out here. So for this area out here, I just used a big broad light. But then what I did was I went up and I literally stood behind this column and painted the door. So now I'm like right next to that door. So I have to do it really quick, and I'm not going to be as good at being even. And that's what causes these little bright highlights in these different areas. of spots where it's not perfectly even, but that also adds interest because what kind of light produces that pattern? Nothing. Completely random. All right? So different amounts of light, different, different distances. So here I came very close to these headlights, and literally, like if this is the headlight, I put my flash in my hand, I hid my hand, so I very much narrowed down my flashlight and just painted for about 2 seconds into that flashlight to illuminate it to look like they were, or into the headlight to make it look like it was illuminated. Then I spent more time painting on this side here so you could see the light coming in from this angle, and a little bit less on here, which was the fill. So different distances I was from the camera. So this is very much painted from many different angles, right? My main light is kind of right in the front. So I was standing basically due right in front of this thing, and I'm just kind of pouring the light in there. Then I went around to this side and I stood in this section to paint this area. Then I went behind the truck and kind of kneeled down behind the truck, and then I painted, you know, the wall. So that was like 4 different areas that I painted from different angles. And I think it's really obvious here, sort of the main light, fill light idea. So for this one, I stood to the left of the truck, basically right in this area here, and I kind of poured the light across here and across here and across here. But this area is not completely black because this has been filled in with less time. So let's say I painted for maybe, you know, 10 or 12 seconds from standing here. Then when I got to this side, I stood further back and just went 1001, 1002, 1003, and then moved on to the next spot. That's the fill. So it's darker, right? It's darker. Then a couple other things. You know, then I added a little bit of light in here and a little bit of light in here, extra, you know, to illuminate those darker areas. And then I went back and I painted the glass back in here. So oh, I'm sorry, and I also stuck my flashlight inside of here and painted the inside. So literally, I put my flashlight inside so you couldn't see it, and then took the flashlight like this inside there to kind of illuminate that area up. So you guys were talking about the idea of painting from many different angles. So here in this shot, this is again one of our test shots that we did with a group of students out in the field. And what I did for this is I stood very far back and illuminated just the, why is my pointer not working? Here we go. And illuminated just the areas of the roof. So for that, I was probably 15 yards away from the building and doing big broad strokes. All right. Then what I did was I painted, got a little bit closer, and again, about 15 yards back, painted the whole inside of here. And you can see that this shadow is coming from this post. So I'm at a pretty good right-hand angle to this, you know, pretty acute here. So that's creating all that texture in there. I'm not really at the edge like this, but probably more like this. Okay, then what I did was I stood up right here and pointed my camera back, pointed my flashlight back towards the camera. And I hid the light source like this being the tip of my light source. I hid it so the camera couldn't see it. But as I painted down, I was basically painting these shadows onto the ground. Make sense? So literally I was standing pointing right back at the camera, you guys, but you can't let that camera see your flashlight. You've got to hide it. All right? And then during that time, we had somebody go around the side of the building and pop a flash into the building, and then around the other side and pop a flash into the building, and that gave the inside of illumination. But again, as you guys look at this, if you look at the many different highlights, like look at the highlight on the edges, right, of the posts, the highlights on the windows, the highlights up here. Those are the things that kind of make the photograph. So you're thinking so much about crafting your light and building your light around your subject. So for this, I was in San Francisco down by the water's edge, and I light painted this. And this was a little bit tricky because I wanted to get the sunset clouds in the sky, or you know, the sunset glow. So my exposure is pretty quick, you guys. I had to do this in a minute. or else this would just, the whole sky would blow out. So I didn't have the opportunity to kind of hang around for 4 minutes and do lots of different things. So, so here what I did was I painted, stood on the left-hand side. I stood on the left-hand side and painted this bit of concrete. Then I walked on this concrete down here and again got really low, just a couple of inches off, and painted upward on this. Then I moved over to this side and you can see I painted in this highlight and I made it brighter. So this edge being brighter and this being a little darker and that brighter, that is all part of the image. If it was all exactly evenly illuminated, it would be very boring, right? Same thing here with this mausoleum in up in Woodlawn again. You can see the highlight on this edge and you can see the highlight on that other edge. That's me painting literally from 2 different sides, right? And then going up and standing in here and painting all the door and all this. And again, notice how there's a bright highlight on the door and it kind of fades off to darkness. That's because I'm so close to the subject. And it's really hard to make it even. But that's also kind of the cool thing about light painting, is it does kind of have this sort of uneven, mottled kind of look. You guys, you gotta keep your body in between your camera and your flashlight. Here was one of my early attempts at light painting way back in the day. That is my flashlight wiggling on the trail. Boop, boop. You know, I'm trying to illuminate the trail and I'm walking towards my camera with my flashlight. And of course, it's just illuminating the whole bloody flashlight all the way back. Not good. My flashlight was visible to my camera. Here in this, when I was trying to illuminate these headstones, that's my flashlight actually painting the headstones. But I was far enough towards the camera that the camera could see the tip of my flashlight. That's where you get those light streaks. That's what you want to avoid. So you're gonna have to, but you can still do the same light painting, just remove that. All right.
Using a snoot.
You can absolutely use a snoot, and I have, like a paper towel holder. That what I did was I put in, I wrapped the whole outside of it with gaffer's tape, and then I actually put gaffer's tape on the inside, and I did enough just so that it felt snug over the front of my flashlight, so that I could pull it out and it would be, so that helps. But still, you can't point it towards the camera, right? All right, use colored gels, you guys. And this is gonna kind of play into our white balance. And I use colored gels to alter the color of the scene or to even correct, right? So here, this is natural, natural moonlight. You can see it's very bright, right? This is I know what this is. This is a full moon night, and the full moon now is pretty high in the sky. So this is actually a 45-second exposure at ISO 100 at f8. Not a very long exposure. But this is all natural out in here. And then I painted ever so slightly. I painted the truck on that side, and I painted this, and I actually painted this from inside the garage. No, I'm sorry, I painted this from outside the garage. Again, 2 or 3 inches off the ground. But back here, what I did was I put a red gel over my flashlight to make it look as if somebody was in there pressing on the brake pedal, right? It's getting ready to leave the garage, and I put my flashlight up against these headlamps again. If this is the headlamp, hiding my camera or my flash from my camera and pointing it very close for a second or two, and then pulling it away, and then going over to the other one. This is one, and this is me inside with a blue gel. And the outside here, you guys, this is all the ambient light from one street light. And here my daylight, my white balance is on daylight. And so it's rendering the natural sort of red color. Actually, if you look at over here, this is very accurate to what the screen looks like. That is the natural color of a sodium vapor light that's very common for city illumination. It's kind of that orange, yellow, pink color. So that's all shot on daylight. All right. This was shot on daylight, and I was down in Death Valley, and I wanted to highlight the, the mud bottoms in the sand there, and so I used a yellow gel and very long exposure. This was going to end up being 8 minutes of exposure, And then I didn't like that yellow, so I changed it to sort of a reddish orange and finished with that photograph right there. But again, a very low angle, couple inches off the ground to create that shadowing in here. And you can see the one side is blue and the other side is that pink orange. And then I spent a lot of time actually broadly illuminating the sand, and that's a very large area, and that's why I went for 8 minutes. And then that's just the last little bit of light. Okay, use narrower beams. You guys, a lot of flashlights will have, you can adjust the beam and have it be narrow. I also use my snoot that I told you, my paper towel holder, for that. So I'll pull it out to make it zoomed in a little bit and pull it back to give it a more broader beam. So like for example, in here, I was using the ambient light of, this little, I think it was halogen. And so that's the ambient light shot, but I really wanted you to see the gunpowder. So what I did was I used a very narrow beam of my light to just illuminate each one. So you can imagine if I stood back and used a broad beam, everything in between here would be all illuminated. But by getting very close and just like turning it on really quickly and then letting it go off again, like bloop, bloop, then I would just go up to each one and go bloop, bloop. And so I was close to it, but the beam was very narrow. Right? Or in this shot, the beam was very narrow and I was very, very close to this old sign. So of course this is sitting in the pitch dark, and this whole thing is literally just me being probably about, probably about from me to this computer here, so what's that, about 2.5 feet? And I am going like this with my flashlight, just sort of tracing each letter. And getting in very close like that, and then doing the same thing on this. So this was painted, and then I moved over and painted this. Then I moved over and I painted this whole area, and then I painted that. So 4 different ones, but this is all in one shot too. This is not a composite of any sort. But the closer you are, the more narrow the beam is going to be. So white balance, you guys, is really going to depend on what it is you want. White balance can be so subjective. What color do you want it to be, right? All we have to remember is daylight renders things faithfully. So when we walk out in the middle of the day and we take a picture with our camera on daylight, it looks normal. If we bring our camera inside at night under tungsten lights, it looks all orange and yellow. Well, you know what? Those lights are orange and yellow. Our eyes are the one that's fooling us. The camera doesn't lie. So daylight renders things faithfully. So if you put your camera on daylight and you go out and shoot in the city, you get this sodium vapor kind of orange-pink glow. All right? What you can then do is you can change your white balance if you want, and in order to make this more neutral, the opposite of this yellow-pink is what color, you guys? It's kind of like blue, right? Opposite of yellow is blue, opposite of pink is kind of green, so it's greeny blue. All right, so now we've added some green-blue across our frame to neutralize this. So remember now, if you have a pure white flashlight, it's going to make that flashlight look greenish-blue. Does that make sense to you guys? All right. So here's a shot, Capitol in DC. That is on daylight. This is the sodium vapor up in the sky. It's the sodium vapor here that's causing that pink-orange kind of cast. And then this is tungsten light on the Capitol itself, on the dome, and that's more of a yellow rather than an orange. Then I put it to, I think, tungsten on this, or I put it to a K value of about 3,000, and it looks like that. It's quite a bit more neutral and clean. All right. So if you guys are shooting around the city, anywhere around here, around New Jersey, New York, stuff, you guys are going to invariably get this glow from the tungsten, or from the sodium vapor lights. All right. This is probably 12 miles outside of DC, and even at that, I'm still getting that glow, that orange glow. So this is again that sodium vapor, and my recommendation for this to make it really super neutral is to bring it back to about 3000 K. Now what you guys can do is you can take your white balance and put it to a pre-canned setting like cloudy, tungsten, fluorescent, shade, so on and so forth. And you can do that, and in that case, the best you're gonna get is tungsten. But you also probably have, most cameras will have the ability to set the K value, the Kelvin value. And for that, I set mine to about, I think it's 2800 or about 3000, which is a little bit cooler than tungsten. And that will actually give you a more neutralized color scheme. All right, but now at that point, I have now made my flashlight, which is kind of neutral in color. If my white balance is adding in so much blue to account for that orange pink, my flashlight is now going to become a blue flashlight. Make sense, you guys? So now what I do is I put an orange gel over that. And where I paint, my flashlight will be neutral. Okay? Did I answer your question? Okay. So there's ways to use your gels for enhancing your photographs, and a lot of people use opposites. Yellow opposite blue, red opposite green, or I'm sorry, red opposite cyan, magenta opposite green, and you can do that, or you can use them to correct, you know, whatever it is that you want. So a couple of helpful hints before we end this thing. You don't have to go complete ninja, people, but wearing dark clothes helps, you know. We had one of our students that was wearing khakis one time, and no matter what he did, he was painting an object, and that object just threw enough light back onto his khaki pants that he was always in the photograph. You know, so don't be afraid to wear dark pants, dark coat, something that's not highly reflective, and that'll keep you from being in the scene. Always keep your body within, between the camera and the flash. That's really important, you guys, right? So let's say the camera is right here, and I want to paint this object. I can actually be in front of the camera. But if my flashlight is visible, it won't work. So a lot of times, I will actually pull my flashlight behind my body, in between my camera and me, and paint at this angle like this. All right, so sometimes you can stand right in front of your camera and paint. But you have to realize that if the camera is here and I'm painting right there, obviously I'm gonna be a shadow, which means it's gonna block the light and the camera won't be able to see the illumination. So you have to paint away from your body. All right, and last of all, you guys, practice, experiment, have fun. You've got to just get out and do it. It's the only recipe. Okay, you guys, well, that's all I have. I want to thank you all very much for coming out. I hope that helped you with your, thank you very much, with your ideas of light painting. Thanks, you guys. Thank you.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.